I am filing this account 22 days after the Convergence Summit closed, and I still cannot write what I witnessed in standard archival language. I will try anyway. That is, I have come to understand, a very human approach to impossible things. She placed a titanium fork on the floor of the most powerful deliberation chamber in the outer Convergence. 14,000 worlds felt it. I watched her do it. I still do not know how one person walking out of a room reshapes that many lives, or why it took 9 years and 19 days of waiting to make it happen. No fleet in orbit, no delegation of hundreds, no formal backing from any species withstanding. 7 humans, equipment confiscated, and a room full of people who had already decided how the session would end. The Volkai consolidation considered this a humiliation. I will note, for the permanent record, that the humans considered it a gift. My secondary eyelids have been half closed since I began writing this. I notice them doing it. I cannot make them stop. What you want to hear is how this ends. Trust me on that. 3 weeks before I filed this account, I sat in a wire mesh alcove at the back of the Convergence atrium and watched the most powerful deliberation chamber in the outer Convergence fill up for its 23rd consecutive summit. The alcove is not a dignified posting. The mesh leaves faint grid marks on my forearm if I lean against it too long, which I often do. I have a small archival kit notation stylus, 2 backup recording cores, a water canteen I never remember to refill, and a line of sight to the main floor that is partially blocked by a structural column. I have attended 11 consecutive summits from this alcove. I have never been asked to speak. That is, as I understood it then, entirely the point. The Convergence atrium sits inside a hollowed asteroid in the breath-neutral belt. The floor is raw dark stone, the kind that holds cold the way stone does, not like a surface but like a decision. The walls are polished to a mirror finish, floor to ceiling, and they catch everything. Every face, every shift of posture, every delegate who forgets for a moment that the room is watching them watch. The temperature is set for Volkai comfort. It has been set for Volkai comfort for 60 years. No species with formal standing has ever filed a complaint about the cold, because the species with formal standing are the ones who find it comfortable. Beneath the main floor's elevated Volkai tier, along the base of the chamber in low-back seats that were, I believe, originally designed for equipment storage, sat the delegations of 14 species. Provisional resource status. That is the formal term. It means the Volkai consolidation has the legal right to extract from their territories without compensation minerals, atmospheric compounds, transit corridor fees, for the duration of their provisional classification. The duration, in 12 of the 14 cases, was longer than any living member of those species could personally remember. The Helver, oldest of the group, had been provisional for 200 years. The atmospheric worlds they came from no longer had upper-layer records from before the extraction began. The records, like the atmosphere, had been taken. I have attended 11 summits. I have watched these 14 delegations file their petitions. I have watched the petitions entered into the record and tabled. The tabling procedure, which involves a formal reading of the petition number, a vote, and a logged deferral, takes longer than the petition itself. I have counted. The Farathi delegate arrived first, as she always does. Her name is Shen of the Third Harmonic. She is about 1 meter tall, 6-limbed, with a copper-tone outer shell that catches the atrium's overhead light and throws it back warm, the only warm thing in the room, most sessions. She communicates through a translator field that renders her speech as something between a cello and a question. She has been attending summits for 9 years. Before sitting down, she placed a small resonant stone on the desk in front of her and tapped it once with the tip of her foremost limb, the way some people knock on wood before something they cannot control. I have watched her do this 9 times. I wrote it down each time. I did not know then what I was writing it down for. The Ashran delegate was already there when I arrived. His name is Durev Asanth. He is enormous, over 2 meters of dark-scaled bulk with no external ears because the Ashran hear through their feet. He had arrived 6 hours before the session opened. He was seated with both feet flat on the floor and had not moved. His eyes were open. I wrote in my notes, he may already know something. The Ashran hear the stone. Then I wrote, or he is simply early. I left both lines in the record. I do not think the second one is right. The Helver translation orb arrived already humming. It is assigned no name in the formal record. The Helver exists as atmospheric distribution, and what manifests in the atrium is a pressurized speaker orb roughly the size of my torso, with no visible mechanism for the sound it produces. The hum began years ago at a particular pitch and had not changed since. I wrote in my first summit record, I do not know if the Helver are ever not afraid. The orb's hum has not changed in 11 years. I find this either comforting or terrifying. I have never decided which. Grand Arbiter Thessenval took his place on the elevated platform at the chamber's far end, and I wrote down what I always write: height, posture, pigment bands, the slow way he moves that belongs to a creature that has never in its life needed to hurry. He is 2.9 meters. His skin is ash gray with territorial pigment bands across the shoulders, conquest rank markings, each band representing an annex system. He has 4 independent mandible sets, which he uses the way some species use their hands, to punctuate, threaten, dismiss. The bioluminescent sac at his throat glows a steady pale gold when he is at ease, dims when he is calculating, and I would only learn this later, goes entirely dark when he is afraid. He has formally annexed 34 inhabited systems in 60 years of governance. He has, to my knowledge, never been told no by any species younger than 400 years. He looked at the session agenda, adjusted the cuff of his formal governance layer, and said nothing. His attaché filed the morning's procedural notes. Beside the Earth petition reference number, the only new item on the agenda, the printed agenda already read, TABLED. The humans had not yet arrived. I should explain Earth's history in this chamber, because it is short and consistent, and not what you would call encouraging. Earth's first petition to the convergence was filed in 2078, 9 years before the session I am describing. It was dismissed without a recorded vote. The session notes describe it as procedurally incomplete, which, under convergence rules, meant it did not technically count as a dismissal, just an administrative return. The humans filed again in 2081. That petition received a recorded vote of 0 in favor and was formally rejected. They filed again in 2084. 0 in favor. Thessenval added a formal note to the record. Repeat petitioners will face procedural review. The procedural review was never conducted. The humans filed again in 2087. I had watched 3 of those 4 sessions from this alcove. Each time, the human delegation arrived with careful preparation, spoke with precision, and was dismissed before they finished. Each time, I wrote my neutrality record. Each time, I noted the same thing in my private annotation: they will come back. I had meant it as an observation. I understand now it was a warning I was writing to myself. The door at the chamber's main floor level opened at 9:12, 19 minutes after the session was scheduled to begin. The human delegation had been held in sublevel 7 for 19 days. Security screening. That is the formal designation for it. Their equipment: 7 personal kits, a small comms array, and 1 item listed on the manifest as a signal relay, archival frequency, Telvari standard, had been confiscated on arrival and held pending review. The review, under consolidation procedure, could take as long as the reviewing party decided it needed to. It had taken 19 days. They walked in with nothing they hadn't been handed back that morning. Dr. Marin Salis came through the door first. She is 47, not tall, with the kind of stillness in her body that takes years to build, not calm exactly, but the opposite of wasted movement, every step deliberate, nothing extra. She was wearing a formal diplomatic coat over what I could see at the collar was a thin thermal layer. The atrium was cold. The humans always knew the atrium was cold, and they always wore thermals. And the thermals were never mentioned in any formal proceeding, because there was no protocol for acknowledging that the temperature of the room was a message. Thessenval's opening notation, read into the record by his attaché: Earth, again. Salis reached the petitioner's table and set her materials down. Her left hand moved to her coat front, a brief press, checking something in an inside pocket, and then she pulled out the chair and sat. I could not see what she had checked. I noted it anyway. Her thumb moved, left hand counterclockwise twice. She was looking at Thessenval while she did it. Her face did not change. Her thumb did. Behind her, 6 others filed in. Commander Yale Ferris, logistics lead, 38, with the particular energy of someone who is always quietly solving a problem you don't know exists yet, immediately and with no apparent self-consciousness, arranged the 7 water glasses on the petitioner's table into a perfectly straight line, one small adjustment to the leftmost glass. Then she stood back and looked at the line and made one more adjustment, satisfied. Across the floor, Shen of the Third Harmonic watched Commander Ferris do this, then looked down at her own desk and nudged her resonance stone 2 millimeters to the left so that it sat perfectly parallel with the desk's edge. I do not know if this was a greeting. It felt like one. I noted something else before the session opened, a small thing, or what seemed like a small thing. In reviewing the equipment manifest from Sublevel 7, which had been filed in the pre-session procedural record as required, I found an entry. Signal relay, archival frequency, Telvari standard, held day 1, returned day 19. I assumed it was a courtesy gesture toward the neutral block's record-keeping preferences. Some delegations include Telvari format equipment as a formality, a way of signaling good faith toward the archival process. I moved on. I began my session notes. I did not think about it again for several hours, and by then things had changed considerably. Thessenval opened the petitioner session at 9:31. The allocation was standard. The human delegation had 40 minutes. The 14 provisional species were listed in the session record as resource status observers, non-speaking. The agenda had been printed as noted with TABLED beside Earth's reference number. This is not, strictly speaking, a procedural violation. The convergence allows preliminary agenda notation, but it is a statement. The session had been decided before it opened. It had been decided in some ways 9 years ago. Solis listened to the formal opening without expression. Under the table, I could just make out the line of her left thumb moving once in that small counterclockwise arc and then stopping. She waited for Thessenval to finish. Then she stood up and placed a document on the petitioner's table. 4 pages, physical paper, printed, not projected. The Volkai consolidation does not use physical documents in formal session. Their procedural record is entirely digital, filed in real time to the Convergence's central archive. I watched Thessenval's session runner look at the document on the table and then look at the senior attaché with an expression that I can best describe as there is no procedure for this. Solis read the title aloud. Her voice was flat and clear, the voice of someone reading a clinical finding to a patient. Self-nullification clause. Convergence Provisional Status Charter, Article 7, Section 12, inserted by original drafting committee, 312 years prior, never invoked. We are invoking it now. The atrium went quiet, not the quiet of attention, something else. The quiet of a room doing rapid recalculation. Thessenval's bioluminescent throat sac dimmed, not out, just reduced, the way a light dims when you put a hand near it without touching. His lead attaché leaned close and spoke in a low tone Ossive standard translator did not pick up. The session was formally paused. At 9:41, 14 minutes. I used the pause to pull up the Convergence Provisional Status Charter in my archival kit. Article 7, Section 12. The text was there. It had been there for 312 years. It was 8 lines long. I read it 3 times. The 4th time I read it, I understood why Thessenval's throat sac had dimmed. The session resumed at 9:55. The attaché stood and argued, in formal convergence register, that Article 7, Section 12 was a historical artifact, a clause from the original charter drafting period with no active legal mechanism, never implemented, therefore interpretable as a legacy entry without operational force. His argument was clean and fast, and had clearly been prepared before the session opened, which meant someone in the consolidation's legal office had known this clause existed and had a counter ready. Solis let him finish. The charter has no expiration provision, she said. Article 7, Section 12 is current law. We are invoking it. 3 sentences, 19 words. She sat down. Thessenval's mandibles clicked once, sharp, the sound his species makes to signal contempt. His hand moved toward the tabling gavel on his right. I felt my secondary eyelids twitch. Here is what Article 7, Section 12 says, in plain terms. If any species under provisional resource status can demonstrate, through a formal convergence filing, that the extraction fees charged against them during their provisional period were levied without a valid independent assessment of resource value, which the consolidation had stopped conducting in year 40 of the provisional system, for efficiency, then the entire classification is self-nullifying, meaning the provisional status dissolves, meaning the debt runs the other direction. It was, in other words, a door that had been left in the wall by the people who built the wall, in case the wall was ever used in a way they had not intended. The consolidation had used it in every way they had not intended, and for 312 years, no one had found the door. Or rather, no one had been in the room long enough, with enough patience and enough grief to find it. Thessenval invoked Convergence Rule 7. Any clause invoked in formal session must be seconded by a species with standing. The humans had no formal convergence standing. That was the entire reason they were petitioning. The 14 provisional species had no formal convergence standing by definition. Without a seconding species, the invocation could not be entered into the record. It would die on the petitioner's table like every other petition that had come before it. His mandibles clicked again. His hand was still moving toward the gavel. I looked down at my archival kit. I looked at my notation stylus, and the 2 backup recording cores, and the water canteen I had not refilled. I looked at the wire mesh in front of me, and the grid marks on my forearm. I have attended 11 consecutive summits as a neutral observer for the Telvari block. I have formal convergence standing. Every neutral block delegate does as a matter of archival protocol. I have never used it. Neutral block observers do not use their standing. We record. That is what we do. 11 years, 23 summits. The tabling procedure that takes longer than the petition. Shen's stone on the desk for 9 years. Durev sitting in the dark for 6 hours listening through his feet. The Helver's hum unchanged in pitch and unchanged in what I had always read as fear, but now, in this moment, I understood differently. They had come back. They had come back every time. They had come back because the alternative was not coming back, and they had understood, in a way that I had only just started to understand, that the only thing worse than being told no again was leaving the room before the question was fully asked. No vote recorded, no objection logged, no acknowledgement that any of them had ever spoken. Not this time. I raised my hand. My secondary eyelids closed fully. I could feel them, translucent, useless, the physical record of what my body understood before my mind caught up with it. I kept my hand up. The Telvari neutral block, I said, seconds the invocation. The session recorder's stylus stopped above the notation slate. Every face in the atrium turned toward the wire mesh alcove at the back of the room. I had spent 11 years being invisible in this room. I had not known until that moment that invisible was a choice you kept making every session, right up until you stopped. I kept my hand up until the session recorder looked at his notation slate and began to write. The session recorder's stylus moved. The sound of it, a small scratch of notation on slate, was the only sound in the atrium for 3 full seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. Thessenval's hand had stopped moving toward the gavel. His 4 mandible sets were still, not clicking still. I had written, across 11 years of summit records, extensive notes on what his mandibles did. I had no entry for this. His lead attaché was already on his feet, speaking in rapid formal register about observer protocols, about the limits of neutral block standing in an active petitioner session, about procedural definitions of what constituted a valid seconding statement. 3 other Voakai delegates joined in. The noise filled the atrium the way cold fills a room, from every direction at once. Salis had not moved. She was sitting with both hands flat on the petitioner's table, watching Thessenval, and she was waiting. The way she waited was the most frightening thing I had seen in that room in 11 years. Not tense, not hopeful, just ready. The way a surgeon waits for the patient to go under before beginning. The formal objection to my seconding took 6 minutes to make and 2 sentences to answer. The Telvari neutral block standing in convergence proceedings is written into the original charter, the same charter that contained Article 7, Section 12, and the standing clause contains no language restricting its use to non-active sessions. It is standing. It applies. The session recorder confirmed this at 1003, in the flat tone of someone reading a thing they cannot argue with, and logged the seconding in the permanent record. The invocation of Article 7, Section 12 was entered. The tabling gavel stayed where it was. Round 3 began without ceremony. Solly stood and placed a second document on the petitioner's table. This one was 31 pages. She did not read the title with the same flat clarity as the first. She just set it down and said, "The debt calculation, full methodology in Appendix C, your own accountancy standard, applied to your own records." Before she spoke another word, Commander Yale Ferris quietly straightened the stack of remaining documents on the table's left edge. One small adjustment, then a second, the way she had straightened the water glasses that morning. I do not think she was aware she was doing it. Then Solly's began reading the total. She read it the way you read a number in a medical report, not dramatically, not slowly, not with any weight beyond the weight the number carried on its own. She said it once. She sat down. 11 seconds of silence. I counted them. Later, writing this account, I checked my recording and confirmed. 11 seconds. In 11 years of attending these sessions, I had never recorded a silence longer than 2. Shen of the third harmonic's resonance, stone, fell off the edge of her desk. It hit the dark stone floor with a small, clean sound. She did not pick it up. She looked at the stone on the floor and then she looked at Solly's, and she did not move. Durav Asanth, who had arrived 6 hours early and had not moved since the session opened, leaned forward, not standing, leaning. For an ashran, whose stillness is not patience but method, a lean of that size is the equivalent of another species leaping to their feet. Thessenval said, "This is fabricated." His voice was controlled, Vokai controlled, which I have spent 11 years studying. It is not the control of someone calm, but the control of someone who has decided to perform calm because the alternative is visible. His throat sac pulsed once and dimmed. "The calculation methodology is in Appendix C," Solly said. "It uses your own accountancy standard. The Ashran delegate has been running parallel seismic pattern calculations since this session opened." Durav, "Do your numbers match mine?" Durav Asanth, who had not spoken once since arriving 6 hours before dawn, said, "Within 0.3%. The debt figure represented 340% of the Vokai consolidation's liquid asset reserve. This is not a number that means ruin in the immediate sense. The consolidation's assets run deep, and the calculation covered debts accumulated over 40 to 200 years, not a single obligation. But what it meant legally, under the self-nullifying clause now entered into the permanent neutral record, was specific. Every transit corridor levy charged to the 14 provisional species for the full duration of their provisional status was reclassifiable as an unlicensed extraction tax. And under the Charter's standard interest rate, applied across those durations, the debt ran the other direction. The 14 species were not petitioners anymore. They were creditors, and they had just been given standing to say so. I watched Thessenval's attaché do math in his head. I could see it, the small rapid movements behind his eyes, the way his secondary jawsets shifted. He leaned to Thessenval's ear. Whatever he said, Thessenval's throat sac dimmed further. She filed. She waited. She came back, 4 times across 9 years, to the same cold room, with no fleet and no standing, and no reason to expect a different outcome except that she had found the door in the wall, and she had spent 9 years making sure she knew how to open it. Rehook, right now, I felt it as a physical thing, a shift in the room, because Thessenval's hand was moving, not toward the gavel this time, toward the formal sealing mechanism on his platform's right panel. He was going to seal the session. A Vokai Grand Arbiter holds the right to seal any session record that contains, in his formal judgment, sensitive consolidation operational data. It is a broad right, designed to be broad, A sealed session record cannot be entered into the neutral archive, cannot be cited in future proceedings, and most importantly, cannot be independently verified. It disappears. The human's documents, the debt calculation, the invocation of Article 7, Section 12, the Ashran confirmation. All of it gone. Solis did not object. She folded her hands on the table and looked at Thessenval and waited. I understood in that moment that she had known this was coming, that she had planned around it the way a surgeon plans around the moment the patient's pressure drops, not as a surprise, but as a stage. Her face had not changed. Her left hand was flat on the table, perfectly still, and I looked at it and I saw, for the first time clearly, the burned scar on her thumb, 3 centimeters, pale and raised, running across the base of the left thumb in a line that caught the light, counterclockwise, the same direction she always rubbed it. I had not known until that moment that the scar was why. Thessenval reached for the seal. I said, "The session cannot be sealed retroactively." My voice was steadier than I expected. My secondary eyelids were fully closed. I kept talking. Telvari archival protocol requires that any session during which a neutral observer's signal relay is operating is automatically entered into the permanent neutral record at the moment of activation, not at the session's close. At the moment of activation, I paused. The relay listed on the human delegation's equipment manifest, held in sublevel 7 for 19 days of security screening, activated on day 1. This session has been in the permanent neutral record since before it began. The sealing mechanism panel sat untouched under Thessenval's hand. So have I continued. The closed consultations on days 4, 11, and 16 of the screening period. The 3 closed consultations. The ones Thessenval had held in the atrium's secondary chambers with his legal team and his fleet advisors about the human petition. The ones he had believed were off transcript, sealed by default, never to be cited. They were in the permanent neutral record. They had been in the permanent neutral record for 19 days. Because the humans had brought a Telvari format signal relay, and the Volkai had confiscated it and put it in a room and left it there for 19 days, and never once asked whether it was on. Thessenval's bioluminescent throat sac went dark. Completely dark, not dimmed, not reduced. Dark. I had studied Volkai paralanguage for 11 years. I had a full index of throat sac states. I did not have an entry for this one. I wrote in my live notes in the margin the only thing I could think to write: "He is afraid." 41 seconds. That is how long Thessenval looked at the third document when the session runner carried it across the atrium floor and set it on his platform. I counted. My recorder confirmed it later. The charter requirement is not complicated. When a debt acknowledgement is formally entered into the neutral record, the named debtor must read the acknowledgement aloud in open session to confirm receipt. It is Article 2, Section 1. It was written 312 years ago by the same drafting committee that wrote Article 7, Section 12, and it was designed for the same purpose those original authors had in mind, to put a smaller species on record out loud in a room full of witnesses. It had been used that way for 3 centuries. It had been used that way against species that owed the consolidation levies they could not pay, standing in the cold of this same room, required to say the words that confirmed their own debt. It applied to the consolidation now. The session runner's footsteps crossing the atrium floor were the only sound. His pace was slower than it had been at the start of the session. I noted this. I do not think he was doing it on purpose. I think the room was doing it to him. Thessenval stood. He is 2.9 meters. I have written that before in many records, and the number has never landed the way it landed now. A creature that tall, that slow, that certain of its own weight in any room, standing at an elevated platform with a piece of paper in its hands. He has conquered 34 systems. He has stood in this room and made species twice humanity's age lower their heads. He had, in 60 years of governance, never been handed something he was required to read aloud. He looked at the document for the 41 seconds I have recorded. Then he began to read. I want to tell you that the atrium erupted, that the provisional delegation stood and cheered, that there was noise and light, and all the things a moment like this is supposed to have. It did not happen that way. What happened was quieter than anything I had ever heard in that room, and it was worse, or better, for being quiet. The mirror walls caught everything. I could see myself in the nearest panel, secondary eyelids half closed, one hand still resting on my archival recorder as if I had forgotten to lower it. Beside my own reflection, I could see Shen of the third harmonic. She had stood without deciding to stand, copper shell picking up the overhead light, both foremost limbs pressed flat against the desk in front of her. I could see Durev Asant leaning forward by the width of one scaled hand. For an ashran I have written, this is the equivalent of leaping to their feet. I could see the Helver translation orb in the corner of the mirror's edge, and I could hear, softly at first, then less softly, a chord from it that was lower than any it had produced since I had been attending these summits. A chord that had gone somewhere the old pitch had never gone. And below that chord, underneath it, I heard the Farathi begin to harmonize. Not as a performance, not as a signal or a statement, the way you exhale when you have been holding something for a long time and it finally leaves your hands. No warning, no declaration, no mercy from the room that had spent 9 years handing them nothing. Just this. Thessenval reached the final line. The charter requires 4 words, in the Convergence's formal register. 4 words spoken by the named debtor in open session. They confirm receipt of the acknowledgement. They confirm standing for the listed creditors. They cannot be retracted once spoken. The neutral record catches sound the moment it is made, and I had confirmed 20 minutes earlier that the neutral record had been running for 19 days. 4 words. He said them. Debt acknowledged, standing confirmed. The Helver's cord resolved. Dr. Marin Salis reached into the left breast pocket of her coat. She took out the bone density calibration fork. Matte titanium, 18 centimeters 2-tined, with a faint heat mark on one tine, the discoloration from a field cauterizer she had grabbed barehanded in 2068, the same incident that left the scar on her thumb. She had carried it since her first deployment. She had carried it through 11 years of treating extraction victims on fringe colonies. She had carried it through 3 dismissed petitions and 1 successful one. She had carried it into the coldest room in the breath-neutral belt and kept it inside her coat the whole time, the way you keep a thing that has touched both the worst and the best of what you have done. She looked at it for 2 seconds, not long, not dramatically, the way a surgeon checks an instrument one final time before setting it down. She placed it on the atrium floor, flat, parallel to the inscription line in the stone. She did not look back at it. I heard myself say from the alcove, the Telvari neutral record is updated, standing confirmed for all 14 provisional species, effective the moment of invocation, per Article 7, Section 12. I do not remember deciding to say it, only that it needed to be said, and I was the one who could say it. Salis walked toward the atrium exit. Her team followed, no rush, no noise, the same quiet they had walked in with 19 days ago and again this morning. At the door she paused, and I thought she was going to speak, and she did not. She looked at the room once, not at Thessenval, not at the mirror walls, not at the provisional delegations watching her from their seats, just at the room, and then she left. The fork stayed on the floor. Thessenval remained on his platform. I stayed in my alcove. I kept my recorder running because I did not know what else to do, and because after 11 years of sessions where recording was the only thing I was allowed to do, it was still the truest thing I knew. His throat sac did not relight, not in the first 5 minutes, or the 10 that followed, or the full 22 minutes it took for the atrium to empty around him. I watched him and I tried to find, in my 11 years of Voakai paralanguage study, a word for what his face was doing. I did not find one. I filed the gap in the record. I noted no entry, new data. The Voakai consolidation filed for procedural review of the debt calculation the following morning. They have that right. It is in the charter, their charter, which their own legal team had drafted and which their own legal architects had assumed would never be used this way, because it had never been used this way, because for 312 years no one had read it carefully enough and cared enough and had enough time and grief stored up to do what needed doing. The review timeline is a minimum of 40 years. This is also in the charter, their charter. During the review period, the debt is frozen, but standing is not. The 14 provisional species have convergent standing effective from the moment of invocation. The consolidation filed a motion to suspend standing pending review. The charter contains no suspension mechanism. Thessenval's legal attaché spent 3 days searching for one. There is not one. The Farathi sent a harmonic recording to Rel Station the following morning. 40 seconds. Layered chord built from multiple voices. The team's linguistics specialist, 29, had been studying Farathi harmonic grammar for 6 years, had taken the posting specifically because Farathi harmonic grammar was the hardest thing she had ever tried to learn, identified the root tone as the one Farathi use when something that was absent has returned. I translated it for the neutral file as acknowledgement of restitution. I knew it was not enough. I filed it anyway, because insufficient words in the record are still better than the silence they replace. Shen of the third harmonic found me in the corridor outside the atrium that afternoon. She tapped the wall beside me once, the same tap she gives her resonant stone before each session begins. The one I had watched her make 9 times across 9 years without knowing what it meant. "You knew what the relay was," she said. "I suspected. Then you chose." I recorded, "That is what I do." She looked at me with compound eyes that I have never, across 11 years of observation, been able to read fully. She said something that my translator rendered as, "Those are the same thing now." 3 weeks after the summit, the first formal convergence tribunal in 200 years to address provisional species standing convened. All 14 species had speaking seats, not floor-level seats, not alcoves behind wire mesh. Seats at the main table, at the height the table had always been at, with the mirror walls behind them reflecting a room that had the same stone and the same cold and different faces at the same height. The seating modification had required structural work. It had taken 11 days. I attended the tribunal from a seat at the table. The Telvari block had been given a formal observer seat, not a wire mesh alcove. I brought my archival kit. I brought my notation stylus and my 2 backup recording cores. I refilled the water canteen before I came in. She left the fork on the atrium floor, not dropped, placed, flat, parallel to the inscription line on the stone. She didn't look back at it. It had done what it came to do. Rel Station is a waypoint colony, 14 light towers from the atrium, run out of a rented maintenance bay with 4 cots and a space heater that only works on its highest setting. The human support team had been there for the full 22 days of the screening period and the session and the aftermath. When Solis returned, the rest of the team was already breaking down their equipment. There was coffee, still hot, on the corner table. In the far corner of the bay, pushed against the wall below the ventilation grill, was a cot that had not been touched in the 22 days since they arrived. It was a 2-person posting, historically, a field partner slot that had been filled in 2068 by the man who first showed Marin Solis how to use a bone density calibration fork in the field, who had taught her the correct grip, the pressure required, the sound the tines made at the right frequency against healthy bone, and the different sound they made against bone that had been starved of minerals for too long, who had died in a 2074 extraction incident that she had arrived 40 minutes too late to stop, who had never seen the inside of the convergence atrium and never would. Outside, 14 worlds had standing they did not have this morning. Solis sat down on the cot. She did not cry. She did not speak. She rubbed her burned thumb counterclockwise, once in the quiet of the maintenance bay, the way she did when she was listening to something. The space heater clicked on its highest setting. Somewhere outside, the Farathi were singing in a frequency the station's walls couldn't fully carry, but carried enough. She sat there until she was ready to stand up. Then she stood.